It's like combination of water and fire, how to combine the rights with the digital world. Some people say that it is non-reconcilable. They have a real impact on the development of our sector. They may impede or foster development, but very much connected with the digital business sector. Speaking about copyrights, no doubts about it. Few doubts speaking about digital rights. We are on the eve of discussion. Well, actually, the discussion has continued for some time, but we are in for the final phase of discussion. It's nice to be brought together here and discuss the topic. It's been the first wave of discussions on copyrights in the digital world, digital tax. Different ideas, different concepts have been discussed. This is an ideal moment to discuss it with the main stakeholders, who are also experts. It is the time to find the right solution. I find it particularly difficult to bring together copyrights and digital tax. I need to be careful to pose questions to the right people, not to ask the people who are experts on legal issues to pose them a question on cyber tax and vice versa. I hope it will be all right. So let's not talk about theory. Let's have some hands-on experience. I've been wondering what to start with. We need to start with something like in Hitchcock films, and then to continue the suspense. Digital tax might be a bomb that hits our sector. The discussion has continued all over Europe, well, in all corners of the world. A number of solutions have been implemented in a number of countries. Other countries are in the phase of discussion. In Poland, it is a kind of discussion based on ups and downs. It was a heated discussion before everybody was ready to accept the tax. Then it was this quiet time, and now the Ministry of Finance has returned to the discussion. Director, where are we at the moment? Poland, Polish market, digital tax. How much is this an idea? How much is this a feasible project? What is the time perspective? Thank you very much. A word of introduction. Filip Majdowski is my name. Tax Systems Department Deputy Head. Digital economy taxation. This is something I've been dealing with for 2 years, ever since I joined the ministry. This is a domain that is a focal point for discussions on technical, problem-focused elements. Who, when, how to pay taxes. But this area includes tax diplomacy, economic relations between states, economic wars, sanctions, possible sanctions. These kinds of elements are included in discussion. What I'm going to start with is the introductory word. Digital revolution impacts all aspects of our life, not only the way we communicate, but also business activity, access to clients, what we sell, and what we use as consumers. Digital content, for example. Therefore, the revolution cannot possibly be outside the tax system impact. VAT and personal income tax, these are two examples. These two examples give you the context for the digital tax discussion. I'm going to show you why we have started the discussion. Personal income tax, or income tax in general. There was a general principle: if a company from one country operates in another country, and if they have that tax division, like a physical presence in the other country, the company pays taxes on incomes generated in the other country. Now, technology has been advancing. We've used the internet more and more because you can reach clients without a physical presence in a given state. So the general taxation rules have already become obsolete. And value-added tax area, a hot topic. You import something from Asia, VAT. The system has been constructed this way. If you have commodities bought outside the European Union, it is the importer that adds on VAT. So if we buy things on the internet, we're obliged to pay VAT. No problem whatsoever, because European Union regulations have stipulated tax exemption up to 22 euros. This is going to continue until next year. There'll be a change next year. We have not implemented this in Poland, but all the consumers know that there is this kind of tax exemption. It was justified by taxation procedure costs that are higher than gain for the budget. There was not a great problem for that. The internet has been developing. Trading platforms have been developing. So the volume of commodities has increased and the system has become obsolete. Not only because there are lower budgetary incomes. We do not have VAT. It is difficult to monitor millions of consumers. On top of that, there is inequality for the market, for consumers and sellers who sell in the European Union versus those who operate in the countries outside the European Union, and they are not VAT taxed. So taxation principles do not follow the market development pace. Austrian economist was speaking about creative destruction. So technology triggers this kind of effect. It destroys the reality we've been familiar with and pushes us to create new rules. And this has been happening in the world of taxes. The international media have been trying to keep up the pace and request the introduction to VAT and income tax schemes. This is time-consuming that requires multi-annual negotiations. Corporate income tax discussion between states. The discussion started back in 2013, and we have not reached a binding solution until now. It may happen soon. We are going to inform you about this in the later part of the discussion. But I want to say is that the process is pretty lengthy. Some states, especially EU member states, either did not want or did not have the possibility to wait. The tax administrations in countries like France, Italy, Great Britain, Czechia, Spain were pressed by the general public. Big international overseas digital corporations didn't have to pay taxes according to the legal basis. Therefore, the aforementioned states introduced digital taxes.
Please bear in mind that what is important is what we understand under this concept of the digital tax. It's a concept that is talked about in the media, but different parties understand it differently. What we understand under digital tax in the European Union is the sectoral additional tax on turnover that would be imposed side and side to the CIT tax, but other parts of the world understand it as a digital consumption tax. But to get back to Poland or Europe, we were very close to reaching the consensus to introduce this taxation in the form of a taxation. It was March in 2018 when the Commission proposed a resolution or a legal act, but the votes of 4 countries were missing for this directive to be approved and enacted. So everyone came to the conclusion that the the CIT reform that is now being discussed at OECD would be the right solution. We have to wait for it a little bit more. Some of the countries, some of the states introduced these measures anyway. Now, when it comes to the official position of our department, we contributed to these discussions at the European Union level. We saw that the consensus could not be reached, and now we are waiting for what will happen at OECD in Paris. And I believe that this year we should see a concrete solution. But I need to give you one caveat to that. When it comes to the global solution, if we were to fall back on the concept of digital tax, we would be using shorthand. We are more working on the trans-border CIT tax. But the work on the sectoral tax is not being carried out, although we cannot rule out the possibility that if they are not able to come to a decision, which is an option, then the sectoral tax discussion will return to the forum of the European Union. Thank you very much. I have some questions to ask you, but I'll do that later. Because now I'd like to, again, stir things up a little bit. We are now witness to many discussions in the media on taxation put on Amazon, Google, Facebook, and the fourth giant. And with that in mind, I have the following question to ask. To what extent is it true, what we hear in those discussions, that these digital giants of digital technology are not paying those taxes? Is that true? Or maybe, again, we are creating a myth. I think we've just heard the answer to that it's not true, that they do have to pay that tax. Under no jurisdiction is there a regulation saying that digital companies, regardless of how you define them, can avoid paying this tax. Initially, we didn't know who this tax would be put on. We still are not clear on that. The easiest option would be to just put into the regulation different levels of turnover, and the clarification would be simple. But it would cause a stir-up like it happened in the United States. Because how do you select those thresholds without being biased? To answer your question, yes, those companies do have to pay taxes, and it's not secret. All you have to do is to go to the website of the Ministry of Finance. You don't even need to use the KRS symbol. And the Ministry of Finance will give you that information. You will see the biggest CIT, corporate income tax payers, funding deposited as taxation. And you can easily find answers to those questions. And you can compare and benchmark different companies against one another depending on their level of revenue. The list is long, including holdings, concerns, and publicly traded companies that pay this tax. All major companies are obligated to publish their financial reports, and you can find how much taxes they pay. And you can see that the tax levels are the same in different sectors of the economy. When you look at the luxury goods sector of the economy, businesses, you'll see how much taxes they pay. The French and the American delegation at OECD are in a dispute as to what taxes should be paid. We are of the opinion that this reform should cover the entire sector in the most fairest of ways. We want to have an across-the-table horizontal solution that would be just and fair to everyone. If anything falls out of line, we need to carry out a reform in a holistic way. If you have a company that sells bags over the internet and you have another company that sells a service, why should you tax the other company higher than the first one? It's not justified. To answer your questions, the taxes are paid, but the primary bone of contention is where they are paid, to what jurisdiction. I remember what Mr. Arax said from the Polish Economic Project. It's a Polish company that sells over 90% of their commodity as a digital asset. By the way, this has to do with culture. It actually exports those assets outside of Poland. But it is still a Polish company. It has a permanent business residence within Poland, so it pays taxes in Poland. Mr. Arak, the CEO, talks about Poland being a powerhouse that exports digital services much more than it imports them. So if we were to pay taxes where the services are delivered, it would change the whole game. The important aspect to us is to have those taxes paid in Poland into the Polish budget. But these are no easy tasks that require a lot of debates. We first of all have to look at the figures that are open to public. You can see that the taxes are paid, and you can see where the money goes to. It goes to the state where the headquarters are located of a given company. So this is not an artificial construct of companies registered at Cyprus that are avoiding taxation. You can see how much taxes are paid. Most taxes are paid in Ireland, but not because of a fake structure, but because most companies actually work there with a higher employee or higher employment rate. But still, it is just a fraction of what is happening in the United States. You can check all of these matters, and it is not secret. We are not looking at any fake schemes. Of course, it is natural that no company wants to pay more than it has to. So we have to also remember that. Thank you, Marcin, for touching on some of the aspects that we're going to have to go back to. For instance, to what extent taxation falls into the category of the fiscal policy of the country, or to what extent does it have to do with creating business sectors within a given economy? We're going to get back to that. To mix up some of the topics, let me go to the second theme. Most laymen don't think in terms of copyright. A copyright is a big part of our business. I've been in the field of copyrights for a number of years, and from the very beginning I've been asking myself, how much longer before we get a clear explanation? Time goes by and the discussions run to no end. And I'd like to ask the question to you, Mr. Minister, from your viewpoint and from the lens of the European and Polish regulations, To what extent do copyrights in Poland are matched to handle the digital world? And what still needs to be done from your viewpoint? Let me also ask you about the copyright directive for the digital market that we struggled with. We wanted to see the right provisions in that direction implemented. Where are we when it comes to deploying this directive? And what can we expect in the forthcoming future? Is the Polish copyright in line with the expectations of the digital world? I was wondering why those two aspects were linked to one another, but I remember that when you thought about the effective provisions to be put into those effective, you called some of the provisions of the directive a link tax. You wanted to tell the internet users that they're going to have to pay the meme tax or link tax, and a lot of untruthful information was disseminated, maybe unintentionally, for one simple reason. Copyright is a unique form of ownership right. It's quite unique, and it is highly regulated, and it is not easy to understand, even for lawyers. You have lawyers who specialize in this field on the one hand. On the other hand, you have lawyers who try to steer away from this field of law. They are specializing in other domains of law, in civil code and labor law and so forth. The copyright law is very often right in the middle of different legal domains, and it requires a lot of clarification depending on the case, especially when licensing. There are many aspects that need to be examined as far, for example, as where the tax needs to go to a given member state or to another member state. Let's leave those issues aside for now. Those are things that specialists should talk about. But to answer your question, no, Polish copyright is not matched to the requirements of the digital world because it can hardly be so as we know it today. The copyright law, the way we have it today, was created in the 19th century in those circumstances when we had a work of art or any kind of work or a deed and the author of that work, and then the situation was clear. Some works were unique in nature, some were open, some were closed, and copyright protection followed. But we moved on to the digital world, and now works can be easily copied, disseminated, and the copy is identical to the original, and that gave rise to many problems. When it comes to the press, when it comes to quoting, online quotations included, and dissemination of information. Information is something that the modern economy and the modern societies are based on. What goals should we implement? The European directive on this matter clearly defines those goals. First of all, we need to create the right circumstances within which those who are owed money get the money in the form of taxes. When there are disputes as to who the money should go to, the person that should be paid to is not receiving the funding at all. So different interpretation has to be considered regarding the authorship in a given publication. So this directive was to regulate these matters and a bunch of others, including those controversial ones. It was supposed to also regulate matters that have to do with putting content up on internet websites and regulate whether different platforms should get a license, or are they a reservoir or just a user of content that is put upon it. Therefore, should platforms purchase licenses depending on the specificity of its operations and the goal and the aim of the person putting the material up? The directive was hoping to bring different stakeholders together. It was kind of neutral for Poland. In line with this directive, the Polish scientists now have a clear view. The same goes for institutes of culture when they use databases. So a lot of good has been created by this directive, but two negatives were formed. For example, digital platforms that did not sign a license cannot publish certain content. So Google is not allowed to publish some of its content. When you look at what happened in France, you know that Google did not purchase some of the copyrights to content, and Google does not put that content up on its web servers, and that kind of limits democratic rights to disseminate information. The second negative side of this directive is that some of the content needs to be filtered, especially content that needs to have a license. And platforms afraid of having a penalty put upon them are filtering content depending on whether they have the right license to put it up or not. This poses a threat because instruments of censorship have been created. Whenever you have a choice of creating something automatically or in a broader or a more narrow scope, you choose the solution best to you. But if you do that, you filter off some of the content that is supposed to end up on the platform. So you're putting the burden not on national level, but on supranational level. So you're putting the burden actually on international corporations. This is a mistake and a dangerous precedence that in the future could lead to even more precedences that will lead to a situation where we will have to pay the international corporations. Let's look at Google.
If they are able to filter out French language press because they do not want to buy a license, they can exercise this right. This is the way to staunch information flow from big economies and big countries. Should Google pay for using specific content? Yes. Should YouTube, that is Google-owned, pay artists? Yes, they should. How to do it properly? I don't know how to do it, but I know how you should not do it. Should not do it the way the directive wants us to do. It might have been too fast. The regulations might have been created too fast. I thought it would be 3 years' time perspective. Technology is well ahead of our capabilities to react and counteract specific phenomena. Therefore, we need to have even more time in order to have value priorities. Should we create solutions which, on the one hand, focus on the financial aspect, or the higher values, democracy, freedom of information circulation, freedom of information access in the economies? Should we give up on specific things or extra regulate them? Or are the creators and copyright holders should be clustered into stronger organizations, and these should be strong enough to negotiate specific conditions regarding availability of the content on digital platforms? Today, young people do not watch television or do not listen to the radio, so the digital platforms are the main source of information to find out about creators, artists, to find out information that is made available and disseminated by editors. So we should assume a different attitude. I don't have the answer how to do it, but we know how we should not do it. We should not do it the way the European Union tells us to do. And this is Polish government's major doubt. Therefore, we filed in with the European Court of Justice, and we are waiting for their opinion. And we've got a feeling that the answer is not going to be that simple. It's not like one judge saying this and the other saying no. So this is what I fear, because this kind of indecisive answer does not give us an insight. We should think about what is the basis of the European community. The values have been highlighted. So make the values the decoy beacon for us. And some questions on top of that should be left to their own device. It will be self-regulated because this is how the free market operates, because it is free by its own nature, and therefore it can develop its own solutions. So there is no need to create solutions that counterproductive. We should agree that they should be well remunerated, but it should not be in opposition to digital businesses. Marcin, briefly. Assault for democracy in France? No, let's calm down. I agree with the minister and his opinion with regards to the regulation. French publishers are still to be found as the heads in the browser, despite the dispute, although there is the demand for the payment, the license. This is about snippets, the short excerpts. The directive says that you can use the short ones. If the directive tells us to use the short ones, we'll be using the very short ones, so the headlines, to be on the safe side, in order not to mess with anybody. And they wanted to have money, and they were outraged. And we believe that these excerpts, these snaps, are not. This is not an abuse, and even pay a lot of money for being advertised online with Google. But there is a bone of contention. But still, they have licensed Google free of charge. And they can still be found on the browser. But we are in the midst of the proceedings with anti-monopoly bodies. So the free market has created a solution that counteracts the directive. Yeah, this is a free of charge license. Yeah, it was exactly the same situation in Germany. It's not that positive. I was in the meeting of the ministers of council at the European Council, so we exchanged different experiences with regard to the implementation. So the French, that were the strongest proponents of the directive, were complaining about the effect presented by the fourth speaker, and they said that therefore we need to have a regulation that pushes the platform to sign license agreements. Polish delegation said something that is related to history. If there is a socialism full of mistakes, we need more socialism. So those who have experienced socialists were laughing their heads off. Others were not laughing, so they must have misunderstood me. In a few years' time, if we implement such solutions, we'll understand what socialism is, and they want to take a step back. Thank you very much. I believe that the ladies would like to refer to the directive, but this is not the only directive in the market. September is the deadline for the second European Union regulation, and here I want to focus on your opinion. How about this implementation? Polish regulations, according to the business sector, are we ready for that? Will it trigger some kind of broadcasters revolution? Or do you broadcasters have a positive solution for that in order to avoid the revolution? Copyright directive, am I supposed to refer to it later? Now, this is the last panel. We do recognize that we have been able to outlast to the end. In order to make this discussion even more heated, I may disagree with some of the things. Copyright discussion has continued for some time, and it will continue for keeps, because new technologies bring about lots of dynamism, and regulations are never able to keep up the pace of the technological changes. So it comes as no surprise that we do not have a perfect solution out now. Never will we have a perfect solution. We need to find the solution that is the best for the specific moment. But we should try our best not to pour the baby out of the bathwater. Let me finish. Polish situation. I'm the representative of the television broadcasters and audiovisual entities, so this is very important for me. No implementation, and I'm not speaking about this directive only, but about a number of directives that were before that. The directives gave some tools and solutions for the member states in order to protect content in a better way. In Poland, they were not implemented in full. So we have the situation that makes the gulf bigger between the bodies that operate on the Polish market and want to protect their content versus the regulations that have been prepared by the European Commission. I'm very happy that the minister is sensitive to the question of cost shift towards the entities. The situation is as followed. The television market is deprived of the tools that are efficient to counteract the situation. They don't have the regulations that have been stipulated for in the European legal regulations, so we have to cope on our own. Like, for example, we cut off finances from pirate services. If we want to act in a most effective way, we should work at the source of the problem, find the root cause, as is usually the case. Article 8.3 is not here. The previous directive's article that makes it possible to block the services that provide illicit content. 30+ countries in the world have these mechanisms in place. We don't have them in place. So the market itself has to find a solution to that. So we try to cooperate with the intermediary. So we started working with the online advertisement market, because advertisements provide source of income for such services. We've had a chance to meet the greatest media houses and advertisers, and their reaction was quite positive. They are open for cooperation. So they exclude pirates from campaigns for the biggest advertisers. The income base, according to EAB Poland, was comparable to legal VOD services in Poland. It was the same economy of scales, so there was much to fight for. Now, this cooperation has made it possible for us to limit the scale, the footprint of advertisements. Rarely have we seen bigger brands. This cooperation has continued for months. More and more companies have joined the campaign. They want to deliver on that, and therefore they take a better care of reputation of their clients, because their clients do not want to see their advertisements in the wrong context. This is a brand safety discussion that has been largely discussed in the business sector. Not do we speak about the content, but also about the context for advertisements. So, for example, there is the piece of news about a catastrophe, and next to it, we see the advertisement that should not be associated with the news content. This is a broad scope of discussion. The legality question is one of them. paying aggregators is another set of companies that we have started cooperating with. Visa, MasterCard operators and banks. There was a positive response to our invitation because they do not want to give their services in the chain of services that are provided on illegal basis. We also speed up the education of the bodies that gain profits on illegal distribution of the content. So we kind of stop the possibility of providing finances through payments and through advertisements. Before we started cooperating with the intermediaries, Deloitte indicated that Poles spend 900 million Polish zlotys for services, for access to illegal content. So there is much to fight for. And we've seen the new finance models that we need to combat against. And I believe that copyrights will not be able to catch up with the reality soon. What needs our attention here is the fact that content protection costs are attached to the infringed parties. So those whose content is illegally distributed for ill-gotten gains have to pay extra to protect the content. And the bodies that bank on distribution of the contents that they do not have the rights for are not limited. No obligations are imposed over them. So this is the comment with regards to the first question. Speaking about regulatory challenges, what is most urgent for us is the Copyrights Directive. September this year, this directive will have to be implemented. A few months ahead, holidays and the virus. We believe in a digital domain, so many things can be processed by teleworking. Where are we now? The body that supports it is the National Broadcasting Council for Radio and Television. They ran pre-consulting session. They were asking the market stakeholders on how they envisage the implementation of the directive. In a few days' time or in a few weeks' time, sooner than later, I'd say, we're going to have the National Broadcasting Council's recommendations on what it should look like. The market players have been sharing their insight on how it should operate. Who finds it a challenge? For platforms, first and foremost. It's difficult for platforms, this or that way. The situation is exactly the same here. The burden for television broadcasters or VOD services, starting 2010, these have been supervised by the National Broadcasting Council. Well, the changes have not been that big. The media market has self-regulated for years, and this has been supported by the number of directives. And directives normally say self-regulate, co-regulate, hand in hand with the market, because it needs to be a direct response to the market needs and demands. In the media market, there is a number of self-regulations which have been created with the National Broadcasting Council's consent. Be it VOD protection of juveniles, how to verify children's age so that they do not have access to the content that is not appropriate to their age, or the latest news, food products that are advertised whenever these are not good for children. We are speaking about the television market here. And there is also the agreement of all the broadcasters with national boards concerned. How to coordinate it, because we have already developed excellent experiences. Regulations are not created in an easy way. This is the result of lengthy discussions of the bodies that have different interests. The fact that we have this kind of co-regulation is a great value, a great asset. What is worth doing here is to see which Lego blocks should be used. It's no use making a big revolution because many mechanisms have already been implemented. The regulations, according to the Broadcasting Act in Poland, already has the response to some of the questions that have been raised in the directive, because in the Polish market we've seen lots of regulations of this type before. So many things have been streamlined. So we need to have a swift action. We need to think about the new bodies that are covered by the media regulations so that they become a part of this self-regulation scheme already in the market. I believe that would be the most efficient solution. The only possible solution with the time schedule so tense. So, Minister, so you've got a ready-made answer in your hand. The main reason to create self-regulation is markets' fear against the regulations that we may come up with. So, otherwise, there wouldn't be so many self-regulations. If they are efficient, there'll be work for clerks, because officers and clerks mobilize people to act. Let me refer to some of the actions. Website blocking, because I'm against we block this and that tomorrow, so these are dangerous precedences. We'll get used to the fact that some of the content is blocked, and we are going to wake up in the brand new world where everything is so beautiful, and we're not going to learn anything new. I'm against any kind of regulations that block anything. As you can see, pirates, how do they bank on that? Two ways. They have advertisements, or they have payments, seemingly lower payments compared to legal platform fees. So, initiative not to have advertisements on such kind of platforms, excellent idea. It will be much more efficient rather than blocking platforms or cherry-picking them from the market. Otherwise, this will be mushroom proliferation next door. We'll have to have armies of people to see whether the platform has not proliferated some other place. So this is pretty expensive and inefficient. Yours is the answer of the market to the demands. Self-regulation that I'm very much for. It does not interfere in the freedom of speech and it does not impose any other obligations on the state. It does not create precedences to regulate specific questions. And there is yet another thing, the question of exercising your rights in the front of the court of law, because there is the rights holder that needs to prove something in the front of the court of law. They have to sue the owner of the website. They say it was not me, but somebody else putting the content on the website. Ladies and gentlemen, we wouldn't have had problems of this kind if we didn't have courts working so slow. Courts of laws are ineffective. So the court system reform, judiciary reform, had this copyrights or intellectual property rights courts that act swiftly and efficiently. This is the only idea. If we advertise, if we complain about broken shoes and somebody says, "Oh, you're wrong," so where should we go? There's some kind of consumer protection office, there's some kind of ombudsman, somebody else, and we think about 300 zlotys pair of shoes that you have to go to the court of law and pay the cost. You are fed up with that.
So we need to invest in the rightly working administration that is swift and that is efficient and specialized in their own domains. It'll allow us to work faster. It'll allow us to go faster through a civil proceeding when the civil procedures code is better adjusted and there's less leeway for the court. So we need to modernize the procedure, and that might already deliver some results, and it would allow us to fight for our rights in a more efficient way. Thank you so much. I understand that Ms. Teresa and Patricia are satisfied with this answer. Jacek, I have a quick question to ask you. Your viewpoint is not, from your viewpoint, on Google as the product maker. Can we reconcile those taxes with the above? Let me be brief, because we're running out of time. When we look back at the past couple of centuries of the development of the goods of culture, you might comply with the thesis that it has to do with the so-called welfare factor. Welfare means that there are resources and people to make those cultural goods. We know from Maslow that the final need of a person is the need for self-realization and to grow. And today, as we look at the culture changing, we see that this idea of welfare or well-being has become democratized, and technology is making it possible to democratize the whole domain of creativity. We can look at the democratization of the audience or the viewers, because the viewership is not as limited as 100 years ago, but the viewers are not as well defined as they used to be 50 years ago. So our viewership has become fully democratized, and the viewers are consuming content that they find valuable. That's one wave. The second wave of democratization that was brought about by devices was the democratization of the creative process. All you have to do today is to have a good phone with a camera to be able to create good material. You don't even need to have good education to test your talent for creativity. There are festivities or festivals dedicated to those kinds of creative works made by using digital media. Short feature movies were created this way. The democratization also reached all the way to cultural supervision. To being a patron to a transaction, for example. Let's examine Patronite or other services that support artists and creators through crowdsourcing or crowdfeeding. Make it possible for the viewers to finance large production projects that lack funding. This year showed one production of this sort. Last year we had one that would not have been made had it not been for crowdfunding. This is to illustrate to you how a device can help you foster human creativity. When you're asking me about relationships with copyright laws, I'll try to answer that. It's hard not to talk about the link tax or meme tax, or there was also a smartphone tax. This kind of tax, or a similar lien, if not a tax, was created in different times. This money does not go for public entities, but to private ones, although it is imposed by the public law. And the money that we have coming from taxation of these assets is not easily collected, as the regulations are not easily enforceable. because there is not enough reporting. Now I want to briefly tell you where this kind of attacks came from. In the analog times, what we had was the kind of reality where you would have a disk with a recording on it, and if you wanted to share it, you could break the law, because the author has the monopoly-based right to decide how his work could be used in different fields, be it in the form of copying or public display. And to protect and safeguard these situations that might be devoid of logic, let's assume that I have the Guns N' Roses CD and my daughter wanted to listen to it. If we were to follow the law, she would have to get another CD, which was irrational. So the directive allowed this use to take place, the so-called allowed use. It kind of broke the monopoly of the creator, of the author, because you could make copies of different works without violating the license within your circle of family and relatives. So it all stemmed from private use. In the analog times, that was quite commonplace. People would copy tapes, books, Xerox pages of books, but today we no longer do that. The digital world that we're surrounded by works in such a way that whenever we share a work of culture, we share not its copy, but access to it. When we talk about access, you are talking about getting access on a new license. The digital devices today, since copying no longer exists, make it necessary to get rid of this payment, because copying in this form does not come to the detriment of the author or the creator of a work. It makes sense. We sometimes copy content on hard drives, on printers. The devices that are not used for copying should not be included on the list of devices because we're following a different procedure. I have a bunch of tax-related questions that I'd like to ask. This will be a cream on the cake, so to speak. But before I ask them, I'd like to address the question to Ms. Patricia. I wanted to grab the mic as long as I have time. As I was listening to the previous speakers, I came up with a question. How do you perceive the upcoming months, if not years, on the copyright laws being changed? There's a lot of talk, a lot of dispute. The question is, to what extent these changes are necessary here and now, and to what extent would it do better to wait it out and see what better solutions are proposed? I'm here coming with a perspective of the telco operator. So I'd like to share with you a different viewpoint on the copyright laws and on the digital tax. And on the way that the digital ecosystem could be and should be regulated. As the content aggregator, on the one hand, because we are the cable television carrier, we provide both internet access and television. We aggregate content, and we want the content to be interesting and diverse for the client. What I'm hearing here is very pleasing to me, especially those statements saying that there is no intent to block any content. What we also want to see is the content to be relevant. local, first of all. It is in our vested interest to support the Polish creators so that they have the right conditions to create this content and make it interesting and to stay competitive against global creators and global content. It is vital to us. And the second important topic that we see that is not that closely related to the digital task is a growing disproportion when it comes to local players being regulated and digital platforms being regulated. Digital platforms are often not covered by the regulations, to put it plainly. In the long haul, this leads to a disproportion, especially when we provide such substitution-based services like communicators. The operators or the carriers are going to be talking about text messages, and we are going to be saying that we have to let everybody in, not having a benefit from it. I wish we had regulators among us, because it seems to me like the regulators are running out of tools. Whenever we say that we'd like to change the terms and conditions for providing services to our clients, we get back a list of requirements. As Netflix clients, we are given a regulation and we can click on accept, and the regulating party has nothing to say to that. It seems to me that the regulators, therefore, do not have the right toolkits to make those terms and conditions more symmetrical. I'm not saying that we should have an even playing field for everybody when it comes to being regulated upon, but maybe we should reconsider the principles that are now in place and have a better level playing field. Because telco carriers are investing heavily into infrastructures, and these investments need to monetize. When we look at the methods for monetizing them, we have many question marks. R2 has very advanced services, but they are the lowest priced. It is good for the consumer, but it is not good for the provider. It's not sustainable in the long haul. Thank you for that. Hard questions are about to follow, but they will be quite concrete. I don't want to talk about the system in the generic sense. Let's get our hands on something more tangible. Let's imagine a scenario as follows. It is November. The OECD has not reached a decision, a consensus. What happens then? Are we going to go on working on the Polish digital tax? Or are we going to try to come to a consensus on the European Union level and generate an opposition? And if we are to implement the Polish digital tax, how high is it going to be? 3% or 7%, and or what? And who would pay it? What kind of construct is budding in the heads of the workers of the ministry? And another question. Don't you think that it's, instead of thinking of a fiscal tool in the form of a task, and that's harder to evaluate, to enforce, execute, wouldn't it be better to work out some regulations that would entice companies to invest more into their business growth? Businesses or startups, the concerns would be investing into startups so that the state's treasury would reap the benefits, but not directly. Maybe this would be a better tool to generate income than a direct digital task. Thank you very much for that question. The world of digital taxation is as interesting as the world of copyright laws. What I heard here was very interesting to me. I do agree that we see the economy being transformed and we are witness to it. The platforms are coming to the forefront. We are talking about digital platforms and electronic interfaces. When it comes to taxation of the shared economy and digital economy and e-commerce in those three domains, when we look at the taxation in the local and global scheme, we want these platforms to pay taxes. Either the platforms or the users of them should pay the right tax. I think this is a tendency that we need to follow for the future. In an attempt to answer your question as to what the next steps should be, allow me to tell you what it looks like now when it comes to digital tax. By this kind of a tax, I'm talking about income tax on the revenue apart from the corporate income tax. Some member states of the EU have decided to implement those measures. France launched VAT, was the first one to implement the VAT, and now France gave the world the digital tax, so they are the harbinger. They're very proud of it. At the same time, the French administration allegedly wanted to generate 500 million euros a year from that, but because of they got 2.4 billion, so they suspended collecting this tax, which is interesting in and of itself. Now all eyes and hands are on deck when it comes to what is happening at OECD. It seems to me that this year in June we will be able to say if consensus is possible. The beginning of July we'll see a meeting in Berlin, not in Paris anymore, where this reform will be discussed and a political declaration sanctioning the shape of this reform will be approved. To give you a briefing on that, I will tell you that there will be two pillars. The tax base will be shifted from the member states, being all oriented to the users. So there will be a lot of relocation. That's the first pillar. Now the second pillar is about the minimal global tax. It is interesting because it might have far-reaching repercussions on any taxation preferences that I will bring you through later on. The premise here was authored by our French and German taxes. The trans-border business is to pay taxes if it runs operations in countries that are lower taxed. We are now talking about the 10 to 15% of a tax, but we'll have to wait and see where it goes. But if there is no consensus globally, the discussion goes back to the Forum of the European Union. The new European Commission had already said that. She gave an interview for Bloomberg confirming that this discussion would come back and that the proposal will again be made to the European Commission. It's hard to tell you how things will turn out, but our position as the country is going to be concrete. Namely, we will want to work on the European consensus. The local implementation of this tax would be dependent on the construction of the directive. The directive that was suspended said that revenue on directed marketing, digital services would be taxed on. We can also add making digital media available to the list or using the cloud to the list, but that will be subject to negotiation. When it comes to the tax rate and who will pay it, the 3% is the proposed value, 3% on revenue. The cost does not play into it. The member states that wanted to implement it would see a different form of it, 2% for Great Britain, 7% for the Czech Republic, so there is a high discrepancy. In my view, this tax rate should depend on the business model, because some use high markups or margins of profit, like 60%, and others have low margin of profit. So that should also factor into the into the tax rate. When it comes to the entities being taxed, we think that we can use the faders, or thresholds. So this biggest international corporations exceeding 750 million euro for a consolidated group to be taxed. So we are talking about the biggest entities that do cross-border trade. And to answer your third question about the ways to entice to invest and use new technology, we have to, on the one hand, make sure that there is revenue stream coming into the budget, and on the other hand, by using the tax momentum, we have to make things easy for all stakeholders. So this either tax that we introduce, we have to first of all have the right revenue, and we have to strike a balance between the older sectors of the economy and the new sectors of the economy, to avoid any kind of privileging one over the other. When it comes to enticing entities to grow and providing incentives, we have three instruments operational in Poland. Number one is the tax relief for economic zones starting 1994. The second tool is a tax break for research and development, so the extra qualified cost qualified past 2016 will be can be written off, and the third relief, IP box, is a tool that will make it possible to commercialize the income when selling services and products from intellectual properties, if it goes for or to further development. It is in place starting the 1st January 2019, so we will be able to gauge its scope and depth soon. We're going to be cooperating with the Ministry of Finance as we go. Now I want to ask each and every one of you one question regarding this year. What kind of regulation are you expecting, and what would you want to see met, domestic or European?
Let me refer to what the director was saying. It would be enough to have all-European reform, a comprehensive and the right one. It would be bad if we introduced some kind of sector-focused taxes, ad hoc, of different types and style, without in-depth consideration. It pertains to domestic and European regulations. Patricia? It's quite alarming when we talk about the extent of analysis, the number of policies, because analysis means time. The longer it takes, the greater disproportions, the greater potential prospective losses. Let me finish on a positive note. The world of technologies, the world of creation are not two separate worlds. one and the other infiltrates the other. In Poland, 42. In the world, 45 GDP is generated by the latter. And there are excellent tools available. And the market is ready. Therefore, the regulator does not have to be a referee. They need to think how to expand good practices to other areas. Let me speak about what Google has been doing. Not a set down procedure, the controversial one, the article in the directive. It has been in place in the market for years, so let's wonder how to expand it to other sectors. Thank you, Jacek. I believe that not what, but how to implement is the key, and the dialogue with the business entities is the key. They are brought together in the forum. This should be held under the auspices of specific ministries. That's the key. Last year, there was a kind of niche bylaw, and we almost got trapped into it. It was technical requirements for TV sets. I don't want to bore you to death, but had it been applicable, we would have scrapped all the TV sets in Poland. This cooperation made it possible to create a good solution. This dialogue seems to be better and better, and there's better and better evidence. And I agree with you, Minister. One regulation that you can have in place tomorrow. Oh, little tricks. I want to say what kind of regulations I don't want to see. I want to have as little regulation as possible to stop this over-regulation surplus. I am for deregulation, otherwise we have problems. More socialism for the problems of socialism. The more regulations, the more problems. The more regulations that bring about more problems. Self-regulation, the best. B, if possible, self-regulation of the market. Frankly speaking, what kind of regulation can I have at hand? Any kind of regulation, whatever you expect. The first part was so nice, the second part not so nice. Briefly, international peace and OECD reform success. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the discussion, and I hope that we next year will be brought together in this positive mood, and there'll be even less regulations. Thank you very much.